Hello, I'm Dr. Mirko Pegoraro, and this is the sixth lesson of your developmental biology module. Today, we are going to talk about the derivatives of the intermediate and lateral plate mesoderm and the derivatives of the endoderm. So we are going to talk about the formation of the kidney, the heart and the circulatory system, as well as some internal organ. Now, in terms of what is going to happen in the lesson, initially we are going to talk about the formation of the kidney, then we are going to talk about the formation of the heart and the circulatory system, and finally we are going to talk about the derivatives of the endoderm, so formation of some of the internal organs. The previous lesson was the paraxial mesoderm, so we talk about the derivatives of the paraxial mesoderm. In the next lesson, we are going to talk about the formation of the tetrapod limb, and this lesson is linked to both the chicken and the zebrafish practical laboratories. If you remember, in the last lesson, we talked about the paraxial mesoderm. This paraxial mesoderm is the mesoderm that is near the neural tube. So if we look at a section of an embryo, we recognize in the middle of the embryo the neural tube above the notochord. Laterally to the neural tube, we have the lateral plate mesoderm, which is going to form the somites. Laterally to that, we have the intermediate mesoderm, and even more laterally, we have the lateral plate mesoderm. Now, if you remember, the somites are formed anteriorly. So while the neural tube is formed anteriorly, from an anterior to posterior, the somites are also formed in the same way, from an anterior to posterior position. Now, the somites are important because they contain cells that are responsible for the formation of the vertebrate, but also muscle and derma of the dorsum, and are also forming the ribs. So the paraxial mesoderm is mostly responsible for the formation of the dorsum, so the back of the animal. However, the paraxial mesoderm is also responsible for the formation of most of the muscle of the body. The intermediate and lateral plate mesoderm, however, extend laterally, so to the side, and more frontally to the body. So what is going to be formed from these different tissues? So the intermediate mesodermal cells is responsible for the formation of the kidney. So see how the intermediate mesoderm is an intermediate position, but also a bit ventrally compared to the forming somites. The lateral plate mesoderm is divided in three sub-regions or three sub-tissues that are responsible for different things. The splanchnic mesoderm is responsible for the formation of the circulatory system. The somatic mesoderm is responsible for the formation of the body cavities, so the cavities where the organs are inserted. And then we have the extraembryonic mesoderm, which is forming the pelvic and the limb skeleton, but not the muscle. Remember that the muscles are mesodermal in origins, and they are coming from the paraxial mesoderm. What's the kidney? We are going to talk about the kidney. What is it? What does it do? The kidney is that organ of the body that filters the blood and produces the urine. So what is the functional structure of the kidney? The functional structure of the kidney is called the nephron. The nephron is a very complex structure that contains several different kinds of cells, but basically is a structure that contains a maze of different tubes. In these different tubes, they can be very small and very fine. They are there to filter the blood, to extract from the blood waste material that need to be removed with the urine. Now, the development of the mature adult kidney passed through three different stages, which see the formation of three different kind of nephrons: the pronephrons, the mesonephrons, and the metanephrons. Now, only the metanephrons, which is the last stage of kidney development or nephronic development, persist in the adult kidney and actually become the adult kidney and filter blood. The other two stages either disappear by apoptosis or persist but become something different and do different things. So the first stage of the kidney development is the formation of the pronephric duct. The pronephric duct is a tube and is formed from the intermediate mesoderm, okay, just a bit ventrally to the most anterior somites. So you remember that the neural tube is formed from an anterior to posterior position, while the neural tube is formed laterally. The mesoderm is defined from an anterior to posterior position. Anteriorly, we have the formation of the first somites, while the first somites are formed from the paraxial mesoderm. The lateral, the intermediate mesoderm start to form the pronephric duct in an anterior position. Then the cells of the nephric duct and the cells of the intermediate mesoderm start to form the nephric duct, if you want, from an anterior to posterior position. So form this tube anteriorly and then move posteriorly on both sides of the body. So here is a sketch, if you want, where you can see the pronephric duct that is already forming anteriorly and already moving posteriorly. And when this happens, when the pronephric duct is developing more posteriorly, it changes name and it becomes the nephric duct or Wolffian duct. We will see that in a minute. However, anteriorly, what is important to remember as well is that anteriorly, while the pronephric duct is formed, the pronephric duct induces the mesenchymal cells around them to produce the pronephrons. Now, the pronephrons are formed anteriorly, and the pronephrons are, like any other nephron structure, are tubular, so they contain several tubes or mesotubes inside, with kind of a reduced complexity compared to the meso and metanephrons. Now, the pronephrons are functional, meaning that they can filter blood and produce urine in some vertebrates, including amphibian, larvae, and fish. However, they are not functional in mammals, which are the amniotic animals. So in mammals, these are not functional and they regress and they disappear by apoptosis, which is programmed self-death. Now, while the pronephrons disappear by apoptosis, the pronephric tubes is moving and developing more posteriorly. This extended tube that develops more posteriorly is called the nephric duct, or if you want, the Wolffian duct. The middle portion of the nephric duct induced the formation from the adjacent mesenchyma of the second phase of development, if you want, of the kidney, which is the mesonephrons. The mesonephrons are called mesonephrons because they're formed in the middle, if you want, from the middle of the nephric tube. Or if you want to remember differently, the pronephrons are formed initially, and at the second stage or second time, the mesonephron forms. Now, the mesonephrons are functional in most vertebrates and are functional in many mammals as well, but they're not working really as filtering blood in mice and rats. And it's not very clear whether in the developing human embryo, the mesonephrons are working as kidney or not. However, the mesonephrons are still important for two main reasons. The mesonephrons are a source of hematopoietic stem cells. And these are cells that are important for the development of blood cells later on. And the mesonephrons develop into the epididymis and vas deferens, which are the tubes that connect the testes to the urethra. So they are where the sperms can move. So what is the last stage of development of the kidney? The last stage of development of the kidney see a strong interaction and induction between the epithelia, the mesenchyma of the intermediate mesoderm more posteriorly. And in particular, there is more posteriorly the metanephrogenic mesenchymi induce the formation of this ureteric tube from the nephric duct or the Wolffian duct. The Wolffian duct is mostly epithelial cells, while the mesanephrogenic mesenchyma is obviously mesenchyma. So it is this interaction between these two tissues that induce the formation of the adult kidney. And in fact, what's happened is that the nephric duct enter the mesenchymi. They are stimulated to enter to grow inside the mesenchymi and to branch and branch and branch and branch. So it is forming a lot of different tubes inside the metanephrogenic mesenchymi. The metanephrogenic mesenchymi, on the other hand, is stimulated by this branching of the ureteric bath to also grow. So there are a stimulation of the two. The two stimulate each other to grow and develop. And this branching, this overgrowth and branching of the ureteric bath end up forming the filtering structure of the adult kidney. In fact, what is the kidney? The kidney is a very fine maze of tubes that are able to filter the blood. They are able to filter the blood, removing the waste from the blood, collecting them into the bladder, forming the urine. And in fact, later on, the ureteric bath, the initial ureteric bath, become the collecting duct and the ureters that take the urine to the bladder. Okay, so the bladder is formed more posteriorly. So it's important here to remember that it is the interaction between these two different tissues, the mesenchyma and the epithelia of the intermediate mesoderm in the posterior, they form the metanephrons, and the metanephrons develop in this very intricate maze of fine tubes that filter the blood.